Good morning, everyone. This is Bonnie Watson. Welcome to Energize Colorado, Ask Me Anything with Brad Feld and Wendy Lee. Just a quick disclaimer. This webinar and the opinions provided within are for general information purposes only and do not constitute legal or professional advice. No user should act on the basis of any material contained in the webinar without obtaining proper legal or other professional advice specific to their situation. Please note that this webinar will be recorded for later use and made available for viewing on YouTube, Facebook, and energizecolorado.com. Great. Well, we are going to go ahead and get started, everyone. My name is Bonnie Watson. I currently serve as the Capital and Transaction Advisor with the Telluride Foundation. So essentially, I run and operate the Telluride Venture Funds and the Telluride Regional Loan Funds. And as the COVID pandemic started, I really had the opportunity to jump in, boots on the ground in our region here in Southwest Colorado and help entrepreneurs and small business and educating people and all the efforts there. And we really got to thinking, how best can we help people? What could we do? What's the best use of our time here? And many people came together, very, very smart people in the room came together and created Energize Colorado. And so I'm really honored today to be able to moderate this call with Brad Feld and Wendy Lee. And Energize Colorado, the thesis of it, and I love it, it's Energize Colorado is here to mobilize generous Coloradans to help Colorado get back to business and to energize us all for the future, which I think is just really great and incredibly needed at this point. So today on the call, we have Brad Feld, who's the chair of Energize Colorado, and we also have Wendy Lee, who is the CEO of Energize Colorado as well. So I'm going to hand it right over, just get started. As we're going through this today, I just want you to be thinking about questions. This is an AMA, that's an Ask Me Anything. So as you're listening from Brad and from Wendy today, just be thinking about, questions. How could you get plugged in, or how could you use the resources here that Energize Colorado will be providing? We have disabled the chat function. So make sure that you're entering your questions in the Q&A function, which is on the bottom of the bar in your Zoom screen there as well. So Brad, I'm going to hand it right over to you.
Thanks, Bonnie. Welcome, everyone. It's a delight to have a chance to talk about something that's a bunch of people have been working incredibly hard on for the last 5 weeks and now formally launching. About a month ago, I wrote a blog post where I talked about 3 crises that are all part of the COVID crisis. So, as beginning of March to mid-March started to unfold, there became awareness, certainly in the US, globally, and especially in Colorado, of the potential impact of the health crisis that was being caused by the COVID-19 disease. That health crisis accelerated dramatically in the US, and I think we've all been very, I'll speak for myself, it's been very disorienting, very challenging, extremely intense. It's May 1st. When I woke up this morning with Amy, I said, boy, that month took a year. Just amazing amount of stuff, a lot of it bad, a lot of it negative, but a lot of it optimistic and a lot of it positive. And as I wrote about these 3 crises, the way I laid it out and the way I started to think about it as a couple of weeks had unfolded was the first crisis, being the health crisis, was unprecedented. Certainly not in our lifetimes have we ever faced a pandemic of this magnitude globally. However, the second crisis that was unfolding, which really played out aggressively in the second half of March, was an economic crisis. And I refer to it as a financial crisis because I think it's more than just this abstract economic crisis. It's both the broad macroeconomic, but financial for many, many businesses, people, government, organizations. Just the stress on the system is in some ways unprecedented in terms of the dynamics that we're trying to deal with. That financial crisis would not have happened if we hadn't had a health crisis. So oftentimes economic crises are triggered by something in the financial or economic system. Sometimes they're triggered by some kind of other macro event or macro shock. They tend to be often localized, not global. In this particular case, a health crisis generated a global economic crisis that touches many, 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 many people. However, there's a third crisis, which is part of this and intermixed in these two crises, which is a mental health crisis. And I think we're starting to really see and understand that more broadly. The pressures from the health crisis and the economic crisis have generated enormous dislocation in the normal ways we work. Last time I checked, human beings were not planning to spend like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for a month in their homes. That was not a sort of normal thing we do. Now, there may be some of us that like to do that. And I'll offer myself up as one who's very comfortable spending lots of time in my home. But for many people, it's incredibly uncomfortable. And certainly for business, it's antithetical to the way so many businesses work. Just think about the shift from work from home. The technology for work from home has been around for a long time. This is not new technology that just emerged. But in 30 days, literally all of business globally learned how to work from home. I mean, that's the amount of pressure and stress around that, the business side dynamics, the individual dynamics of trying to work in your house with your family, with your partner who's working at home, with kids that are no longer going to school, trying to worry about your business or the survival of your business or the health of your business. All of these things trigger a mental health crisis. And I'm really just talking about it from a business lens. You could cut it at any element of our society, how that mental health crisis instantiates. So if you think about these three crises, one of the things that I started to see happening and was very motivated by was essentially the phrase we've started to use at Energize Colorado, which is Coloradans helping Coloradans. There's a lot of activity that's happening globally in lots of different places, whether it's individual governments at a federal level, a state level, a local level, whether it's philanthropists, whether it's large corporations trying to do things. However, sort of in that mix, I started to see a lot of individual private citizens who were entrepreneurs or business owners start working to address the issues for other business owners across Colorado. And that started to evolve into something that I would categorize broadly as a focus on small businesses or companies with less than 500 employees across Colorado. And there were a number of people in the private sector in lots of different categories of these types of businesses that were really motivated to get involved and help other businesses figure out what to do in the midst of these three crises, figure out how to evolve their businesses so that they were more effective coming out of the crises, and really build a community across Colorado of small business owners who were helping each other survive and thrive through this experience. Now, as this started to come together, and I'll talk about the dynamics in a moment, we really started to understand and think about businesses, these small businesses, these sub 500 person companies on multiple dimensions. The small business language that's often used generally refers pretty cleanly to local businesses, businesses that are locally focused in a particular geography, serving a particular city or a particular local population. They could be service businesses, they could be product businesses, but they have a local focus. We have a lot of those types of companies throughout Colorado, especially many on the Front Range in the four major cities in the Front Range, but up and down from Fort Collins north to Colorado Springs south. The second category that is well known in Colorado, and it's something that in the last decade, Colorado has become very visible for, entrepreneurial companies. Companies that are very fast growing companies that tend to have a global audience or a national audience. They're not just selling locally, but they're selling very broadly. In addition, in Colorado, we have a very, very significant and vibrant rural business community that consists of both of these types of businesses, both local businesses that sell locally in the rural populations, or the rural communities, but also entrepreneurial companies that are growing and developing very quickly. And a lot of activity in the rural business startup community and overall ecosystem has grown and developed quite substantially in the last 4 or 5 years. And Bonnie's been very involved in some examples of that, for example, in the activity in Telluride. But we've got a bunch of other types of businesses in Colorado that fit in this category. We have a very significant sector of women and minority-led businesses. If you start to especially get down to businesses that are 50 people and less, this is a very significant strata of our community in lots of different places. And those businesses are also being very impacted by the pandemic. Nonprofits, even though they're nonprofits, fit in this category. Many nonprofits throughout Colorado are less than 500 employees and have the same kind of structural and economic challenges that are happening to many of the other businesses in our community. In the last couple of years, the contingent workforce has emerged as a really significant part of our economy. And this is not just Uber drivers, for example, or gig workers, if you want to use the gig economy language, but also people who have temporal jobs across multiple organizations for a period of time. It's a very significant part of our business infrastructure within Colorado. And then as we've explored through this, there's areas that surprised me in terms of the magnitude of the number of businesses in Colorado that fit in categories. An example would be manufacturing. I knew that there were lots of small manufacturers in Colorado, but I didn't realize that there were over 6,000 manufacturers in Colorado that were under 500 employees. So we started organizing, this team that got together started organizing our discussions around these different categories of businesses as we were trying to figure out how to be helpful from the private sector perspective across all of them. My wife, Amy Batchelor, and I have been involved in starting a number of nonprofits over the years. And I would say just very simply, the creation and ramp up of Energize Colorado has been the most impressive ramp I've ever experienced. Not just in terms of the people and the potential impact, but the amount of energy, the amount of effort, and the amount of focus, as well as the dynamics around collaboration. As this idea started from this notion of, how can we as a private sector nonprofit or private sector group of people help a bunch of other business people throughout Colorado through these crises? It's worth noting that the effort started on March 23rd. 15 people got together for a call. There were a number of the leaders on that call, but I'm going to call out three particular ones that I think really helped inspire and drive the thinking here. Wendy Lee, who is the CEO of Energize Colorado, Eric Matisik, and Mark Nager. And the dynamics of what happened sort of in that first meeting was this idea of figuring out something that would be durable, would be inclusive, would not be duplicative. It's not intended to replace other organizations. It's not intended to do things that other organizations are already doing, but instead it's intended to really activate and energize lots of people across all of the things that are going on and make sure that we collaborate and amplify the initiatives that are happening, whether they're being done by other private sector initiatives, by other nonprofit initiatives, by state or federal initiatives, and making sure that Coloradans understand and can process the best sources and get the best knowledge of help, mentorship, engagement, involvement, and just fundamental support in this moment in time from a business perspective. Today, there's over 200 volunteers who are actively engaged in this. So 5 weeks later, this organization has spun up. Kudos to Wendy and the leadership team for their amazing effort of basically building a 200-person startup in 5 weeks, figuring out what it was going to do, how it was going to do it, getting started on some things that didn't make sense, and like all good startups, very quickly iterating, and other things just getting begun that make tons of sense. So just the activity around it has been incredible. I used the word inclusive a few minutes ago. We're very, very focused on being inclusive of everyone throughout Colorado that wants to engage in any way. And on the Energize Colorado website, there's multiple ways to sign up to get involved. But the idea here is Coloradans helping Coloradans. So if you need help, it's a resource. And if you want to help, it's a resource. And our hope is that it can be one of the connectors throughout many other connectors in the state of Colorado that are helpful to businesses at this time. There's a handful of initiatives already listed on the website. There's a lot of resource and content, and the website points today at a lot of different other initiatives that are going on throughout the state, including both privately at the state level, at the federal level, and at the county level. So there's a lot of pointers to other stuff. There are a handful of initiatives that have been spun up so far by Energize Colorado, but there's a few things coming next week, two in particular that'll be announced formally, and a steady stream after that. So one of the goals, as I said earlier, is not to duplicate activity, but instead to amplify other activity. So there will be some initiatives launched by Energize Colorado, but a lot of initiatives by other organizations highlighted, augmented, and amplified by the organization. Just want to end the beginning part of this by saying thank you to everyone who has helped in any way. I said earlier, this is the most impressive ramp of a nonprofit I've ever been involved in. While I did highlight Wendy, Eric, and Mark, there were many, many people at the very beginning of this who will get highlighted regularly for the amazing work that they've done so far. And it's an opportunity on a volunteer basis for people to engage as much or as little as they want. One of the nice things about an organization like this is it can be very flexible in terms of people's engagement. We're in a moment right now that definitely still has feelings of intense crisis. But that will shift, and that will shift to a place where the crises are localized or the crises are more focused, or we're dealing with a different phase of it. And different experiences, knowledge, expertise, perspectives, and engagement is incredibly helpful. So with that, I'll again just say thank you to everybody that's engaged so far. Invite and encourage anybody who wants to engage to please engage, and hand it off to Wendy Lee, who's the CEO of Energize Colorado, to say a few things.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks, Brad. I have such an honor. Thank you very much for kicking that off in such splendid fashion. A little gratitude from me to others. First, Bonnie, thanks a bunch for being our MC and curator of Ask Me Anything. I appreciate you doing that because I know your days are very busy. And to Brad, a special gratitude to I'm so motivated by your dedication to the state of Colorado and for your vision and your partnership and helping us bring Energize Colorado to life. So I want you to know I feel that way this morning, especially. So a little about me, because you mentioned Mark and Eric and many of the others are from Colorado, have been around in the state for a long time, doing a range of activities to support the economy here, startups, small businesses, et cetera. So from our first date on March 23rd, our first Zoom date, there's been a lot going on. And I want to say, like many of my colleagues on the team, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an operator, I'm an ecosystem builder. And like you all, I'm big-hearted and have really returned to Colorado in a very intentional way. I'm not from here originally, and I've talked about that a little bit to many of you, but this is my second time, so that must mean I really like it here, or I wouldn't have come back. The first time I was here in the early 2000s, and I had the good fortune to meet Brad and Amy. They were gracious hosts and connected me to a bunch of cool folks in Boulder. I've stayed connected to them through all these years. The last 15 years, I was in the Bay Area doing a bunch of startup stuff, and also most recently in Ohio, where I was leading a public-private partnership, and I learned a lot there about the connectivity required between Main Street businesses and startups and government and universities and all those coming together to drive an economic development strategy. So it feels great to be back home and to apply my learnings especially from the Midwest. And now in a very serious time of crisis, I get to deliver some value. So I want to emphasize a couple of points around Enterprise Colorado that Brad beautifully teed up. Yes, we're Coloradans helping Coloradans. Over 200 of us now, spirited innovators collaborating with a diverse set of business communities. including nonprofit leaders and this contingent workforce that Brad teed up that's so important to our economy here in the state. So we are in the short term helping our communities get short-term relief. We have to get short-term relief. So that's been job one. Secondly, we're helping our communities and our nonprofits navigate a wide range of programs and resources so we can begin to safely reopen the economy. And then ultimately, we want to be very involved in rebuilding our organizations, all of these segments that Brad mentioned, so we can return Colorado to the most vibrant economy in America. Now, some of you are saying, now, how are you going to do that? That sounds like a lot of work. We already heard Brad said we spin around like tops. In fact, I guess you could call us Energizer bunnies in some ways, but we are spinning a lot, but we do have some very specific paths of support and help. Number one, it's our job to harness and share knowledge through our site, which launched today, and also through webcast and town halls, a range of activities. But we need to harness and share knowledge because people are overwhelmed and there's a lot of noise in the system. So that's one of our paths. Number two, we need to leverage, excuse me, and mobilize partnerships with civic organizations and other public and private entities that are also offering services, right? We can really point people to those programs as well. So we have to know about them, work closely to them, and that's what good collaboration is about. Number three, we will create some new solutions. Brad talked about us rolling out a number of these. We have identified some gaps. If we can't find others that are filling those gaps, we feel a responsibility to spin up an offering, an initiative, whatever it takes to fill that gap for the short, medium, and long term. And lastly, we will make some recommendations for structural changes, especially those required for this contingent workforce, the gig economy workers. I think we'll learn more and more about how we can help that particular group. So our team is designed to have both a vertical focus as well as a horizontal focus with an initiative-based offers. So we'll talk about that at the very end so you can meet some of the leaders. Enough about me, enough about us though. Now, the whole point of this session is to hear from you because we need to hear your questions so we can refine our message and better prioritize our work so we don't spin like a tsunami on every interesting opportunity and also get some ideas for some new offerings too. So with that, Bob, I think I'm going to turn that back over to you. I think I'm even on time, which is a scary thought. And ask me anything begins.
Perfect. Brad, Wendy, thank you. This is truly really exciting opportunity. I'm really excited to see where Energize Colorado goes and all the good that it will do. We have a question here. How is your approach truly community-based? And before either of you answer that, I'm just going to give an example quickly. Here in the Telluride area, I've had so many people reach out saying, how do I get plugged in? It's not a small business. I have LPs from our fund reaching out who are well-rounded investors, very experienced people saying, how do I help? And so we have been able to connect those people and those mentors and investors with small business. And, the feedback from those businesses, my goodness, like I didn't think about it in that perspective. That was so helpful. And it's really this boots on the ground, very community-based, very local effort. And now we actually have a platform to plug those people in. And so that's just one example that I personally have and have seen. But Wendy, I'd love to have you just elaborate a bit more on that. How is that approach truly community-based?
Well, when I think of community, I go back to the word inclusive. And making sure that as we're actioning and supporting, that we're concerned and engaging a wide range of people that are operating, yes, in their groups. So they could be startups, they could be Main Street businesses, they could be nonprofits, but they also have some common needs, right? And so understanding those first, which we've been doing a lot over the last month, and then also recognizing a layer of specific need they have, as we've talked about with this contingent workforce. So I think community-based means inclusive. It means what do we have in common, as well as what is unique to the sector that we're part of, or the segment that we're part of. That's how I'd respond to that.
I'd add a few thoughts to it. For people familiar with some of my work and some of my writing specifically, I wrote a book in 2012 called Startup Communities. And that book was primarily focused on entrepreneurial companies and the idea of building entrepreneurial ecosystems around the world. And I operated from the premise that you could build a startup community in any city in the world. And in fact, every city in the world needed a startup community. When we started talking about this near the end of March, a lot of the same principles that apply to entrepreneurial ecosystems and startups specifically applied more generally to small business. And across Colorado, there is already a layer of people and experience in building these kinds of startup communities and entrepreneurial ecosystems, and the energy involved around people contributing energy and putting energy into the system as part of the starting point without an expectation of what they're going to get back. So we have a phrase we use at Techstars called give first, where you're willing to put energy into the system. You don't know what you're going to get, but it's not fundamentally altruistic. You expect to get something back. You just don't know when, from whom, over what time period, and what magnitude, in what consideration. So there's a bunch of philosophical stuff that I think underpins this, where fundamentally the activity is extremely localized and it's very bottom up. It's not being dictated top down that says this is what you should do and how you should do something, and if you do this, then this will happen. It's the inverse, which is it's working person by person at a ground level, at a business level, in geographic communities or across vertical markets. Again, I think Wendy will talk about the two different dimensions of this, with the idea that there's lots of people who need help right now, and there's lots of people who are in a position to provide help. And building that flywheel is really important. And just getting that flywheel going, even with existing infrastructure, and just making sure people know about it. And by the way, some of the expertise that people have historically has been very hard to access. And the philosophy of mentorship and the ability of people who have a lot of experience, especially people who, for example, have run businesses in other downturns, can be incredibly helpful in this moment with business people who are going through downturns, even if they're not in your geographic community, but part of a broader community of the type of business you're in or the type of company you're creating, or just somebody who has some experience that they want to share. In addition, recognize that we are dealing with these three crises. So the crises are not just economic. The health crisis, there's a huge health infrastructure, of which some of us are involved in, that is trying really, really hard as quickly as possible to get ahead of and get ahead of the virus and get us into a safe position where businesses and employees and people, attending and participating and consuming from businesses are safe from the disease. A lot of the health related issues are going to be ones that the private sector has to address and has to incorporate in a way that's critical. Think about if you're a business owner and you have a business that people physically come to, it's going to be your responsibility at some level to keep your employees safe and to create a safe environment for the people who are coming to your business. Understanding those things and understanding who is doing what and how that's happening in whatever your particular business is, ultimately is a local community business level set of activities over a long period of time. Of course, there's rules and regulations, there's top-down dynamics, there's support from federal, state, and local governments. But as a business community, we have to be leaders ourselves in making sure all those things happen. So I give that as the philosophical approach. And anytime there is an effort to be, I would say, community-based, oftentimes the language and the word community means different things to different people. I think that's good too, because I think that diversity around how people are approaching the dynamics and the nature of what they mean in terms of this, whether it's purely local or across an industry segment or across a business type, knowing that we're focusing on businesses that are 500 employees or less, that puts us all in one broad community that then has lots of subsectors.
Great. Thanks, Brad. I love this question. So Carl asks, this feels like a restart. It feels like a do-over. It feels like a blankish slate, as well as trying to rebuild strong legacy industries. But are there new domains, verticals, specific business needs that didn't exist before March 23rd? And what startup themes do you really hope take off immediately?
Wendy, can I start with that one?
Yeah, please.
So I believe that we have just woken up in 2025. Let me tell you what I mean by that. 2 months ago, if you said to any business person, 100% of the business world, or not 100%, let's say 80 to 90% of the business world is going to be able to work from home. And in fact, will work from home. And when I say it's not 100%, I understand that there are a lot of people in essential businesses, a lot of people in healthcare that are not working from home in this moment, but that are on the front lines, whether it's at the grocery store, whether it's at the hospital, whether it's at some other health agency, whether it's essential services that we need to keep sort of our infrastructure running. And I think it's worth calling out that there's many, many people who are on the front lines right now when the rest of us are working from home. And it's important to recognize and appreciate the work they're doing in this moment, especially. But at the same time, if you made the assertion that, again, 80 or 90% of the business world would be working from home at the end of April, the person would have looked at you and said, "You're crackers. What's wrong with you? You're crazy. That's nuts." They might even say, "That's not possible." And lo and behold, we now have a societal culture that may or may not like work from home. Some people do, some people don't. Some companies are more effective at it than others. But that for the last 30 days, the vast majority of us have been operating this way. The technology existed. The infrastructure and the cultural dynamics and the cultural norms of this kind of work didn't. So we accelerated that. Another really dramatic example is telemedicine. Telemedicine made 10 years of progress in 4 weeks. 2 months ago, if you'd said, telemedicine, why isn't telemedicine getting more adoption? There would have been all kinds of reasons: regulatory, technology, adoption, usage, efficacy. And if you actually think about what's happened in the last 4 weeks, much of that has just gone out the window. And in fact, telemedicine is incredibly effective and has been for quite some time. And so now there's a fundamental behavioral norm. Now, this will have, to Carl's point of view, or Carl's question, this will have dramatic impacts on lots of businesses going forward. Let's talk about business travel. I know a lot of people that I've talked to that have said, "You know what? I don't know why I'm traveling the way I've been traveling. I don't need to fly somewhere to have a bunch of meetings and do a bunch of conference calls somewhere else. Like, I can do that from my office desk. I can do that from my home." So there's a realization that there's a lot of things that are going to be different. In terms of the opportunity space around that, I'm not a predictor. I think there's a lot of prognostication going on, and I think there's a lot of people who are starting to talk about, here are the 15 categories of great opportunities for new businesses going forward. Because I'm not a predictor, I am less focused on what the specific opportunities are. But I would underline that the way we work and the way we interact with each other and the way business functions will be fundamentally different, or is fundamentally different, as a result of this 5-year jump that we were on the curve for anyway, but it just accelerated very quickly. The last part of that, and this is a personal view, I don't believe that we have the COVID crisis resolves say clearly, I don't believe the COVID crisis resolves with us waking up one day and everything going back to normal. I think we are experiencing something that lots of science fiction has talked about. If you've watched Bill Gates' TED Talk from 2015, you've heard him talk about it. There's been lots of stuff that's sort of gone around recently that, you know, we've been kind of lucky as a species that there wasn't a pandemic like this until now. And this pandemic has showed us how woefully unprepared we are as a global society for something. And it's amazing the havoc 120 nanometer thing has wreaked on us. I think it's something that we're going to have to be prepared for dealing with on an ongoing basis. And that'll reconfigure a lot of the ways that we function as people. And I think that will take some time. And so opportunities will emerge from that. What those opportunities are, entrepreneurs and business people are always looking for new opportunities. One of the things that's been awesome to see in this scenario, and I'll end with this, is the three categories of businesses that I've experienced as an investor and interacting with. The three categories are companies that are types of companies where this crisis has been devastating to their business. If you depend on travel, or you depend on people going to work, or people coming to your place of business to interact with you in some way, you are under enormous distress. A lot of those companies have already come up with creative ideas and creative ways to satisfy their customers in different ways and to engage with their customers in different ways against those constraints that will be beneficial to them when some of those constraints relax. There's another category of companies that's benefited from the crisis because of the shift of adoption. You know, we're all using Zoom now. Video conferencing would be an easy example of it, but there's a number of companies like that that make products and services that are more important in this context. And those businesses, many of them, at least the ones I'm aware of, are thriving without being opportunistic. They're not the ones that are charging 10 times the normal price for a N95 mask, but they're actually companies that are providing something of substance. And then there's a lot of companies in the middle, which are ones where, you know, they're scared and they're under a lot of stress, but they're hanging in different ways and they're adopting and they're evolving. And I think it's useful to have the perspective across all of that. And within Colorado, we've got all of those different types of companies. So trying to make sure that we're helping each other and learning from each other in this context is key.
Absolutely. Wendy, do you have anything to add there?
I don't. I think that's well said.
Wendy said Brad just ranted for 7 minutes. I'm next.
I'm good. I'm good. I like hearing the birds and I like listening to you. So we're all happy.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was a great point, Brad. You know, this, unfortunately, the world will never go back to what it was before, and especially if places in workplaces and how we operate from home and whatnot. But we do have a question, and I would love if you have any input here, just to provide it on a very high level. You've touched on a few of the industries from the last question, but Cliff asked, would you speak to the opportunities for innovation and entrepreneurship specifically in healthcare, food distribution, climate change, and our workplaces, et cetera, in the wake of the COVID crisis?
I'm happy to give quick hits for all those, and then Wendy add on. I mean, healthcare, we already talked about. Telemedicine is enormous. In addition, I think you're seeing a very meaningful increase of internet-based health-related support. So not just classical telemedicine, but the numerous number of organizations that are helping around mental health that are doing it in a non-medical or non-clinical way, but available through the web. An easy example of this, for example, would be mindfulness apps. That's a simple example, but if you extend that into a very broad category of things that allow us as people to engage with content or with ourselves or with peers to help us on the mental health dimension. And I think you'll see a lot from Energize Colorado around that. Food distribution, you know, restaurants providing delivery services and pickup services. You're going to see an enormous amount of change in the way that you order in a restaurant as a technology shift. In Colorado, one thing that has been interesting to me is the amount of regulatory shift around things like alcohol distribution, which is actually a very powerful thing that supports restaurants, that has been at least in a regulatory sense relaxed in the short term. I don't know if it'll be relaxed in the long term. I think that'll take legislative action to do. And then you're also seeing situations where the entire food delivery infrastructure has got some changes, right? Health in manufacturing facilities, the way that food moves to grocery stores, the way that food moves from grocery stores to individuals, the rise of delivery services like Instacart and others are changing the way that the whole food distribution system and network works. We had a massive shift in farm to table or movement in farm to table in Colorado in the last decade. And I think coming out of this, there's going to be even more focus on the power of local production of food and local distribution of food, and on and on. Like, there's just so many things that, again, lots of stuff that's sort of in play, but hasn't scaled or been institutionalized, or has been limited by some sort of either market incumbent force or regulatory force, or just lack of sort of focus from an entrepreneur in all of these categories.
Yeah, a couple of comments. I had the good fortune this week to actually talk to my colleagues at Procter & Gamble, as they are constantly thinking about the future of new brands and new services that they might offer. And one of the discussions was around just the change of home space. So everything that the home now has to serve, from an educational component to an eating component to a work component. Now, we're not saying forever we'll all be doing that all the time in one space, but companies, CPG companies, are trying to imagine, if you will, innovation from that experience, right? And not just with better Wi-Fi, right? And a bigger table, so you can have all your laptops, stood up. But I think it was a very interesting conversation that they're now really doing some research in to see what's the future of that home space, which used to be more singular, at least for some, than it is now. So that's one thing. I do think, having come from decades of work on the customer experience side of technology, that's really my background, I just wonder what our expectations and needs are going to look like as we begin to consider going back into a restaurant, right? And how close, the social distancing thing is a phase of what we're going to have to go through, but how close will we ever want to be again, right? And how will that restaurant really look? Not just the device to take the money and how you get taken to your table, but just in general, how will we really reconfigure that experience now that we've gone through this crisis? I think there's always been focus on customer experience for all kinds of reasons, but I think this could really shift. And then the last thing I would say is, although you and Amy are much more involved on the climate change, everything going on through the Nature Conservancy and other entities like that, but I'm very mindful of what's happened as a result of us staying home, the silver lining of that relative to the carbon footprint. And when I read those articles and look at the impact of the oceans and the air quality, et cetera, even though as a capitalist, I guess I'll worry there are a bunch of garages empty, so someone's not making money that owns those garages. I'm really touched by this impact. And I hope we don't have to continue to have pandemics to change our behavior relative to the planet we live on. So I think customer experience, I think space, either restaurant space or home space, and the whole notion of this pandemic impacting favorably the climate issue, I'm paying attention to that. And I hope we'll have really passionate entrepreneurs do some discovery and innovation in those areas that'll blow our minds, right? Just as the scientists are trying to solve this pandemic, I hope we'll have entrepreneurs that'll dig in to those categories as well. What else, Bonnie? What else do we have?
Great, thanks, Wendy. Great question here. So I've heard the word inclusive a number of times today in today's dialogue. What does that actually mean to Energize Colorado, and how are we going to include our smallest, our most vulnerable businesses in that discussion, and what does that mean?
I'll start, Brad, and you can add to that, because that's really top of mind for me. Because, you know, it's easy to say entrepreneurship, local businesses, nonprofits. I mean, those are macro, you know, segments. We have a big responsibility to dig in to the very specific micro segments that are not getting what they need to survive. Now, let's worry about thriving. Right now, we have to stabilize and we have to survive. So part of the work we need to do, and we're not completely there yet, but we are mindful of it, is take meetings, learn about groups that for whatever reason, they're unrepresented in the programs coming down from the feds or the state or the counties, and see what we can do to fill that gap. And we have some examples of that Mark Nogger and Brad and others are leading around one of the offerings we're working on. But the way we're going to do it is by doing it, not talking about doing it, but to listen to folks like you, Bonnie, who are there on the ground, people that are in Colorado Springs and Fort Collins and all around, and say, okay, here's a group that needs some attention now. And that's how we have to do it. And there's no other way to do it. You can't just go get a link and, you know, start, you know, a chatter stream around it. You have to really go meet people and understand. And that's what we intend to do. That's why we have 200 people that are donating their time and talent, not just to put their names on a website, but to actually dig in and get their hands dirty and meet people and understand what we can do to help them navigate the crisis. So that's my approach to it. Brad, do you want to add and be more specific? I'm open to learning from your point of view on that.
I think that's well said. A couple of other comments, right? I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. We're not trying to duplicate efforts, and we're not trying to replace anybody else's effort, but we're trying to be engaged with amplifiers of and supportive of other efforts already in place. So an example is you'll see an initiative that we roll out next week that's aimed at companies with 25 employees or less. And that entire initiative is being deployed through existing infrastructure that exists in the state through both nonprofit and agency-related organizations. So it's looking for places to help where there isn't help currently being provided, but then provide it with and in conjunction with organizations that are already engaged with the various people. Another thing I would add, and we'll announce it, I think Tuesday or Wednesday next week. The thing to look for is the Energize Colorado Gap Fund will be the name of the thing that's being announced. So not to be mysterious about. The other comment on being inclusive, as I've lived in Colorado for 25 years, and I said this earlier, you know, means different things to different people, right? It could be the size and scale of the business. It could be gender, it could be ethnicity, it could be whether or not you're a business that has the sophistication to be able to engage with some of the programs that are available. I've personally learned a lot through organizations like Entrepreneurs for All, which is now operating in Longmont, started in Massachusetts, in 7 cities in Massachusetts, about basically being inclusive of people who may not identify as entrepreneurs, but helping them get involved as small business people and learning, having mentorship from experienced entrepreneurs, and going to them rather than having them come to you. You know, people, when they're living in whatever their communities are, if you say, hey, if you just come to Denver and come to a meeting in Denver, all will be good. And if the person's living, you know, in Eagle County, well, maybe, but that's a lot. If the person's living you know, in Greeley, well, okay, but maybe I don't identify with those people, or maybe I don't feel comfortable going to that meeting, or maybe I can't because of the responsibilities that I have. So making sure that being inclusive means going to other people and trying to understand what they need, and then helping them in a productive way. And I'll just go back to what Wendy said, right? We're in the midst of a crisis. So a lot of this is a combination of urgent, important, reactive. A lot of people are under a lot of stress and are very scared, or incredibly challenged in terms of the dynamics of their business. And so a lot of being inclusive is to try to be emotionally available, recognize that people are in lots of different positions in life and have lots of different resources. And when you're in a position where you have resources, to try to really be available to the people in these crisis moments that have less resources or are really struggling.
Absolutely. I think this will probably be our last question. And Brad, this is right up your alley, but how could the VC and angel investor community shift to offer more patient forms of capital to fund novel, localized, community-focused businesses in the new economy that may not be able to experience growth at the speed and scale investors are usually looking for?
Yeah, I think the labeling on the type of the investor is not how I would encourage people to think about this. I wouldn't say how can VCs do it or how can angel investors do it. I would instead say, here's the category of businesses that need funding coming out of this crisis. How can we generate meaningful pools of capital to fund those types of companies? And if you go back in time some and you look at, for example, the notion of social impact investing or impact investing, double bottom line, triple bottom line investing, there have been a number of waves of this in the past that have had some success, but I would say are limited relative to the scale that they could have had success of in terms of the companies that they impacted and the capital they brought to it. I'm hopeful this time around there's more thought and understanding on that. I will tell you, as someone with a foundation who has shipped a lot of money out in the last couple of months during this crisis to support lots of different organizations, I'm certainly tuned very much into a different kind of economic return dynamic for many of the investments that I'm making. I think Amy and I already had that from a philanthropic perspective, but I think in the private sector, especially in terms of allocation of capital, understanding that there's going to be a lot of different return characteristics that are available, which may be very different than what traditional VC and angel investing has looked for. So, a general answer versus a specific answer, I don't have three, like here are the three things that need to happen. But I do think it's going to be very important for that people with institutional capital, especially individuals that have meaningful amounts of wealth, high net worth individuals, who normally would put that capital through philanthropic efforts, focus on doing it through other sources to businesses that are less burdensome on the businesses or more available to the businesses, given the type of returns they'll be generating. And I think there's going to be a lot of focus on that going forward.
Yeah, I agree. And Bonnie, you're an expert in this, right? I mean, you do this every day in rural Colorado and Telluride. You're talking to businesses and you're trying to help them think through the whole capital stack, and identifying sources, regardless of where it comes from, that they need in the short term and long term. So I look forward to having more of those kind of conversations, as Brad said, about all the sources available and then how you use them over time to grow your business, and regardless of the kind of business it is. So I think this is a silver lining, I think, in this situation, is that we're going to learn about different ways to finance businesses of all types, and not just be a bank or a VC or an angel or. I think we're going to be much more creative.
Absolutely. And just to speak to that really quickly, I work in rural Colorado, as many of the people, on this team do. And working in the capital world, the silver lining, just as you've pointed out, is that we have to now think differently. And we're really seeing the capital landscape change, especially in the VC world. That conversation's been going on for a long time. The traditional VC may not work. Maybe we should move to revenue-based investing. But now, the real challenge is we need gap funding that is patient and that will work with entrepreneurs who are trying to recover from this devastating pandemic. And that's challenging, but it is certainly a conversation that is happening. And we are starting to see several alternative funding sources pop up, which are really helping businesses get from today to opening their doors to successfully and hopefully coming out of COVID alive. It's a challenge, but it is a conversation that is absolutely happening right now. And there's so many great things coming out of the woodwork, like the GAP Fund that Brad has mentioned here today as well. So very high level, we could certainly get to the weeds on that conversation. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Wendy. Wendy, I'm going to let you finish the call.
No, you need to run on to your next gig, as they say.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being with us, and I'll wrap this up.
Sounds great. Thanks,
Yeah,
Brad.
awesome.
Bye-bye.
As we're moving on, we do have a capital working group with a lot of smart people from a range of funding sources that we're going to make available to business owners. So that's going to be fun too. So I think we're going to wrap it up here with some thank yous. First of all, in the spirit of volunteering, we want to be really grateful to Wowza Media Systems for providing all the services required for today's broadcast, and they're going to continue to work with us. So many thanks to you, Justin, for being such a good guide and making sure we've followed the requirements that you need, and just for being a good partner. So thank you very much to Justin and Wowza. And then, as I mentioned, as I was wrapping up, wrapping up my piece earlier, the questions that you've asked, I'm sure there are others that we haven't gotten to. We will summarize them and get to them, but they're going to help us refine our message, better prioritize our work, and get ideas for new offerings. And these handsome folks on this slide are, this is part of our leadership team. And we're showing this particular set because they are organized, as Brad talked about, by specific segments, from rural business to women and minority business, front range business, manufacturing, nonprofits, entrepreneurs, and the contingent workforce. And we're providing easy ways to contact me and them. We are community activists. We are a ground game, bottoms up folks. And so we want you to email us so we can get to know you and understand the particular needs you have, and make sure we either send you to a resource or get you connected to a resource or help create a solution that is more appropriate for the need that you're describing to us. So this is just part of our team. Again, we have over 200 people around us and supporting us every day, but I want you to see some faces that you can begin to connect to and recognize. Okay, and then, so we have that Michelle, I love that picture of Michelle. She is our amazing leader of people, and how fortunate we are to have her on the team. And Brad, thanks for getting her involved. The truth of the matter is we still have a database of folks that want to engage. We know, though, that as we take this initiative, Energize Colorado, and scale it, we're going to need a range of people. And we'll have to swap out because not everyone can be 100% forever on this particular nonprofit. So if you're interested in being a mentor, you go straight to Give and Help at Energize Colorado. If you have specific skills that you want to apply, either inside our organization or to other businesses, let us know that. But we are open for business, meaning eager to get you engaged in what we're doing, to join the team. With that, I want to, again, Brad, thanks for being such an awesome partner, a dear friend, and keeping our spirit going, even through the days where it seemed like there was no light, just a lot of stuff to do. I think today's AMA, at least for me, connected me back to the real spirit of the work. And I think for us to do this like we are, we have to remember that we are Coloradans helping Coloradans. It is not about being perfect. It is about making progress every hour, every day for those we serve. And I'm specifically honored to lead the organization, to be a public servant in the state, and to continue to listen and learn and provide solutions to the crisis that we're in now. So with that, any closing comments from you?
Just thank you. Thank you to Wendy, to you, and thank you to everybody else. And one of the things that's been so powerful for me in the ramp up of this is the number of people as volunteers, as private citizens who are just jumping in to help other people throughout the business community in all aspects of Colorado. And I'll emphasize what you said. The goal is to do good, but not necessarily to get everything right. And so the learning and the rapid iteration is a critical part of it. Feedback on things that are already happening somewhere else. Hey, I see you're doing this, but did you know about that? That's incredibly helpful because it just continues to be this thing that that evolves quickly. And then I'll end with, I don't think anybody really knows the answers to the dynamics around the COVID crisis. Again, if you watch the news, you get plenty of opinions every day. There's lots of assertions masquerading as facts. There's lots of hypothesis masquerading as assertions, and in some places, hypothesis masquerading as facts. There's a lot of fear and consternation, anxiety, stress. Keep going down the list of emotions. I would encourage everybody to recognize that it's okay to feel all that, and to feel confused, and to feel stressed, and to have bad days, and to be frustrated, and to be disappointed. But to try to wake up each day optimistic. I think it's an amazing state that we live in. I think that the number of people that I know within Colorado who are trying so hard to help us collectively navigate through this crisis is it's profound to me, and it's very, very powerful. So just try to stay optimistic on the down days, but feel your feelings. And I'll just end with a thank you to everybody who's been helping, and I look forward to meeting many more people.
Yes, I echo that. And we begin again May 1st, Friday. Okay, many thanks to everyone who joined in. We will close this off and post a recording of today. I encourage you to share it with others that weren't able to join us. This was our first AMA. You'll hear more. Again, thank you all very much and have a good Friday.